You wouldn't know it from the way he is discussed currently, but not long ago, Dwight Howard was one of the top 5 players in the NBA. So we aren't just talking about an 8-time All-Star here, but a basically automatic selection for the All-NBA team in 2008 to 2012. He was a defensive wizard on the level of Hakeem Olajuwon and Bill Russell. Howard won 3 straight NBA Defensive Player of the Year awards in 2009, 2010, and 2011. There are only 3 other players with a trio of that award. Their names are Dikembe Mutombo, Ben Wallace, and Rudy Gobert. And he was also the best rebounder of his generation, leading the league in boards 5 times. Howard was the youngest player to reach, in his words, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, all the way up to 9,000 rebounds. And he finished his career with over 19,000 points, 14,000 rebounds, and 2,000 blocks in his career. That places him in the exclusive company of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett, Robert Parrish, and Artis Gilmore, all Hall of Famers. That is how dominant the center was at his peak. Despite all these achievements, the big guy has left off the all-time NBA Top 75 list, made in 2021. His former coach Stan Van Gundy summed it up well, explaining, "Whatever the reason that he got left out, there's something more than basketball to it." But not everyone has forgotten just how dominant Howard was. As a result, The Athletic placed the brilliant center in the 56th spot of their top list. Howard was the number 1 pick in the 2004 NBA draft, and if you redid the selection today, he would still be your first choice. Howard was undoubtedly at the peak of his powers during his time with Orlando. In 2009, he led the perennial underdogs past LeBron James and the Cavs into the NBA Finals. Howard had the standout performance of the entire series in Game 6. The center scored 40 points and took 14 rebounds. Orlando played Kobe Bryant and the Lakers in the NBA Finals. Howard was pretty miserable in Game 1 and was held to 1-6 from the field. Game 3 was the high point for Howard, as his team won on the back of his 21 points and 14 rebounds. In Game 4, the center took an incredible 21 rebounds, adding 16 points. However, the Magic lost in overtime. No one blamed Howard for Orlando's loss. They were overmatched and had surprised everyone by beating out the Cavs to reach the finals in the first place. In 2010, Orlando made another deep run in the playoffs. They reached the Eastern Conference Finals, but that was the end of the good times in Florida. Soon, trouble developed between Howard and the Magic staff. It would alter his reputation forever. Howard believes he was cast unfairly in the role of the bad guy. The player said, "I think I was very likable in Orlando, and the way that situation ended, I think people felt I'm just this bad guy." One moment defining the end of the Magic era was a press conference by coach Stan Van Gundy. Stan told reporters he believed the center was trying to get him fired. Just then, Howard walked in and crashed the press conference with a smile. The player had no idea that Van Gundy had just aired their dirty laundry. So when Howard put his arms around the coach, it became an iconic and viral moment. For all the wrong reasons. Coach Van Gundy later admitted, "I don't think the incident that he and I had, we only had one, I don't think it reflected really well on either of us." His next step was the Lakers, who, as always, were trying to build a super team in 2012 to 2013. They brought Steve Nash and Howard to pair them up with Kobe Bryant and Pau Gasol. Howard was heartbroken about going there. He remembers LA, which was one of the places at that time that I did not want to go. "I felt like it would have made people feel as though I was trying to follow in somebody else's footsteps." He was referring, of course, to Shaquille O'Neal. Literally, massive shoes to fill. The next stop was Houston, another very ambitious team under the thumb of a massive star. The Rockets built their team around James Harden. They got along fine on a personal level, but the basketball chemistry just wasn't there. Corey Brewer played small forward for Houston, saying, "They were just different. I wouldn't say it didn't mesh. Just have different personalities. I don't feel like they had any problems that I knew of. We were trying to win." The team succeeded, but many felt they did not reach their considerable potential. After the Rockets, Dwight became less highly regarded and was bounced around mercilessly. He made the round with the Atlanta Hawks, the Charlotte Hornets, the Washington Wizards, the Lakers, and the Philadelphia 76ers. At various times, the center was also on the books for the Grizzlies and Nets, but he was out the door before playing a single minute. That is not the usual treatment for a player of this caliber. Even as a bench player, there is no doubt that Howard could contribute. His rebounding skills, in particular, remain top-notch. but the former All-Star brought a good deal of baggage wherever he went. Although he was not versatile or good enough to be a starter anymore, he still felt like one. Therefore, Howard often complained about his minutes and how often he got the ball. Unfortunately, that is a sour recipe for popularity, and teammates and fans often turned against Howard. In one particularly memorable incident, a Wizards custodial worker called out "brick" when Dwight missed a practice shot. It symbolized how badly the center's reputation had deteriorated over his wandering years. Dwight's second stint with the Lakers was the most remarkable point in his latter career. As we all remember, in 2019-20, the team won that controversial bubble championship. Howard had a solid contribution that year, coming off the bench to provide 7 points and 7 rebounds per game, and the center also showed a considerable amount of personal growth at the time. Teammate JaVale McGee said, "He came in every day, pounded everybody, said hi to everybody, made sure everybody knew he was happy in his situation. He constantly was the ultimate professional." And that could not have been easy for Howard. First, the Lakers brought him in to sub for DeAndre Jordan, but when the starter was injured, the Lakers made LeBron James the starting center instead of falling back on the veteran center. Perhaps the time has dulled his past accomplishments, but on the other hand, Howard's complicated journey may have affected his legacy. People often discuss the downturn in Dwight's career as a product of personality problems, and there is some truth to that, but many big NBA stars have big egos and are challenging to get along with. Howard is not even close to the worst in that regard. Another vital part of the puzzle is the repeated injury problems the center has experienced. Howard started as a particularly healthy specimen, playing 351 NBA games straight from his debut appearance and on. But in April 2012, Dwight underwent surgery to repair a herniated disc in his back. He continued to play effectively for a while after that. But the truth is, Howard was never the same player. Those back problems impaired his mobility and undermined his main advantage, supreme and overpowering athleticism. Howard would never score over 20 points per game again. His rebound and blocking numbers also went down. In 2018, Dwight had to undergo similar surgery. This time it was an L4-L5 lumbar microdiscectomy to treat a disc herniation that was causing severe nerve irritation and gluteal pain. In other words, he suffered from backaches and a pain in the ass. Despite suffering from legit health issues, the media was filled with unpleasant rumors about Howard. They wrote that he was exaggerating the pain and being a prima donna to force trades and get negotiating leverage. In 2012, he complained that it hurts emotionally. That's the first thing, it hurts. And then people say and think I'm quitting on my team. This is a real issue. I tried to play through it, and it just made my back worse. In retrospect, considering the repeated surgeries and dip in stats, it is clear that Howard was dealing with real problems and was unfairly maligned. It is easy to blame Howard for becoming less effective, but the truth is, basketball changed during his career and in a way that made him less relevant and dominant. Dwight is the ultimate traditional center, and they became unfashionable as the game became more agile and sophisticated over the last few years. Indeed, there is no doubt that had basketball retained its focus on the solid but limited center of the past, Howard would have had more staying power in the NBA. But that argument only goes so far. Part of a player's job is to constantly improve their game and adapt to changes in the game. As a result, we have seen so many players add facets to their game in recent years. Just think of guys like Jason Tatum and Giannis who added dimensions when called upon. Meanwhile, Howard's game seems to have frozen since leaving the Magic. There is no doubt that he could have done more to adapt to the modern game. Howard had earned a bad reputation that may be unearned. His style was out of date and injuries were taking their toll. And at 37, the Atlanta-born star was just getting old. For all these reasons, the NBA was no longer calling Howard. But the center was not ready to hang up his jockstrap just yet and signed with the Taoyuan Leopards in Taiwan's T1 League. The team soon found itself in last place. Even worse, the Leopards made headlines for their participation in a brawl. The Leopards beat the Taiwan Beer Hero Bears 120-108. But during the game, the biggest fight in Taiwan's T1 League history, according to Taiwan News. 12 players, including Howard, were ejected. He doesn't seem to have played much of a role in the fight. But isn't that symbolic of his whole career? Somehow things always go wrong for Howard, at least since that trade from Orlando. But his achievements remain staggering, and we believe the man belongs in the Naismith Hall of Fame.